Yeah, thanks, Richard, for coming on my channel for this awesome discussion. So, should we start by maybe a brief introduction about yourself?
Yeah. So same deal, Shannon. I've been in data science now for six about years. It depends on where you really start measuring that because I first got my feet on the ground in the field back when I was in graduate school, actually. And actually, it all came about through just kind of making connections with some various people. Like somebody whom I've been doing some odd work for here and there during undergrad, and then I went to the same place undergrad all the way through grad. He eventually gave me some research work to do, kind of in a consulting type of capacity. Like they had a project that they wanted to do, and they brought me on
Mm.
as a consultant, statistician, data scientist. They didn't really define the titles very much at the time.
Okay.
But there were a number of things like that which came up while I was in grad school. And interestingly
Mm.
enough, every time through some kind of connection to somebody else. Well, eventually I got out of grad school, joined a small company, left after about 3 years, then went to the opposite extreme, joined a huge company where
Mm.
I was working in kind of a
Mm.
contract capacity, and I was there until very like for about 18 months until very recently.
Mm.
Now I'm working full time internally with a clinical research organization. So private
All
company,
right.
um, I mean private company, but doing research all the time.
Mhm, mhm. All right. Awesome. Yeah. So, as you're working in industry and you're from a statistics background, right?
That was my, yep, yeah. Back in, I did my bachelor's in stats and econ. I liked stats way more than
Mm.
econ. And I mean,
Wow.
just throughout my entire life, like I had this knack for
Yeah.
numbers.
Cool.
Statistics kind of appealed to me more than pure mathematics because it was easier for me to see just how potentially that could be translated into real world
Mm.
value as opposed to pure
Mhm.
math. This may have just been me being naive and ignorant, but to me, pure math seemed more something that you would have to confine strictly to an
Mm.
academic kind of setting. And I knew right off the bat I didn't want to stay in academia. So knowing all these qualities about myself, stats seemed the way to go.
All right. Yeah. And like you mentioned that you did your grad school and then you were introduced into the field of data science. And right after you getting your bachelor's degree, did you know that you want to go straight into grad school and then into data science, or did it just kind of like you stumble upon it?
That's a funny story, actually. So, I always had kind of an interest in doing grad school right after I got out of undergrad. The reason was more of a psychological one because I figured
Mm.
I would get out of my undergrad and then let's say I went
Yeah.
straight to work. Well, I would start making money, but I knew at a certain point I wanted to do my master's eventually. And so the
Mm.
dynamic of it, like I knew myself that if I were making money and then I stopped making money to pursue an education, it would absolutely drive me insane. So I was
Mm.
really trying to pursue the graduate degree, like just, and plus my understanding of the broader market, just from some people that I knew who had been doing this a little bit longer than me was you kind of need a master's now. So I kind of
Mm.
knew that was something I needed to do. And what ended up actually happening with me was I was trying to just keep all my options open. I applied to grad school and I applied for a job. Honestly, I didn't think I was going to get into grad school, and I thought 100% I was going to get this job. Turns out the
Mm.
opposite happened, and
Okay.
I got rejected from the job, and one day later I got into grad school. So I thought, you know what, that
Oh,
works for
cool.
me. I'm happy with that.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean, in fairness, the data science term didn't come about until 2011 or so, and I didn't. I had heard of the term floating
Mm.
around a little bit. I didn't realize it
Mm.
would become so central to my life and the
Mm.
path that I wanted to get myself on. So I
Mhm.
honestly a little bit blindly stumbled into it. It's rare
Mm.
it's rare that I think that you stumble into a path of success really, but I feel like I got as close to that as possible.
Mm. Yeah, awesome story. And So maybe let's talk about more general things like how does a typical day look for you when you're working as a data scientist right now in the
Yeah.
industry?
Yeah, so I will say that's incredibly company dependent, and it varies a lot. From my experience, it's varied a lot based on the size of the company and just the overall dynamics inside the company. I'd say a lot of my time does revolve around writing code, but particularly when I was in a smaller company, there was
Mhm.
honestly a lot more meetings, a lot more just having to just being able really to collaborate with people and just brainstorm ideas.
Mhm.
Yeah, and a lot more on the consulting side of things. So little bit of it is contingent on the size of the company, a little bit of it on what
Mhm.
exactly the company actually does. But I think the
Right.
long and the short of it is every job kind of differs, and even with
Mm.
the jobs I've had, every project kind of differs a little bit. So it's always a
Yeah.
tough question for me to answer.
Mm. Yeah, and you mentioned that you worked in a smaller company and also a bigger company.
Yeah,
How does it differ, or how is it the same for both?
I'd say the biggest thing is with a large company, they're going to have their
Mhm.
processes down. Um, with a small company and even a mid-sized company, they were really preliminary in figuring out what data science even looked like. In the mid-sized
Mm.
company, I mean, I was the very first data scientist, and that, I mean, presents challenges of its own because you're
Mm.
kind of going a little bit blindly at that point, and that's fine. But particularly if you want to have any kind of structure or process to it, it's a bit of a chicken and the egg situation because you have to come
Mm.
up with a process for something you haven't even really
Mm.
done yet. and, um, and you kind of have to do that because I mean processes are good. They save you lots of
Mm.
time and lots of effort. But you
Right.
have to stumble around and fail first before you can come up with the process.
Mm.
Whereas with a large company, you don't have to worry about that. That's set in stone. That's done. So
Mhm.
from my experience, like being in a larger company, I was a little bit more of a task taker, I think,
Mm.
versus with a smaller company, you can kind of steer the ship a little bit, I think.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and which one did you like more?
That's tricky. Um, I'm glad that I worked with a larger company because
Mhm.
you have all these opportunities, like all these different colleagues and people that you can learn from.
Mhm.
I don't know that I would want to be there forever because, I mean, let's face
Mm.
it, we all have this human desire in us to, work and move ourselves up the ladder a little bit, right? That can be pretty tough to do in a large company because you're going to have hierarchy,
Mm.
you're going to have bureaucracy. You can literally do that in a few years if you're at the right company in a small or mid-sized capacity. And I mean,
Mhm.
not only that, like the relationships I formed in, again,
Mhm.
small or mid-sized,
Mhm.
for some reason to me, it seemed a little bit better that way. So, I
Mm.
mean, it'd be a difficult sell to get me back at a large company. Like I don't want to say it's impossible, but right now, just
Mm.
being at something smaller, I feel like it's suiting me better for who I am and what I want to do.
Yeah, interesting insight. And are the focus on for both company size? Are they different? Like, are they oriented toward more sales, or are they oriented toward making innovation? Is it the same, or does it differ in terms of revenue or innovation or giving value to customers?
Yeah, so the first company I was at, it was all healthcare based,
Mm-hmm.
and what the desired outcome was depends on whether the client was private sector or public sector, because I work with both.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, with healthcare, there's always going to be a push towards safety, right? I mean, especially in
Right.
the public sector, it gets a little bit more hairy with the private sector because you have this combination of yes, we need patient outcomes. That's priority number one. But if our clients are for-profit healthcare systems, then yeah, there's a money component to it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's certainly that. Now, in everything I've done following that in the pharmaceutical industry, that's been a lot more oriented towards clinical trial research.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, and you're gonna have a big push with in the pharmaceutical industry. You're gonna have a much bigger push towards publications.
Okay. Oh, so you're also like analyzing data from clinical trials, is it?
Hmm.
Phase one, phase two?
Yep, yep.
Okay. So there's a lot of paperwork, a lot of ethical issues as well.
There's a little bit of that, yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, when I was doing that, usually that was a little like I think for the most part,
Mm.
as you know, with any kind of data analysis, there's quite a pipeline to it.
Yes.
Typically with me, all that kind of stuff happened a little bit more upstream. And then when it got downstream to me, that was less of a concern. There was less of, okay, well, this person dropped out of the trial. Now we gotta kill off a bunch of rows, or oh, we can't use this feature anymore. I never had to deal with anything like that, fortunately. So
Okay.
now this
Right.
now this is the case there was data were mostly clean. I don't want to say completely clean, but mostly clean.
Mm-hmm.
And then with
Uh-huh.
healthcare data, that's the worst. That's a
Mm.
disaster.
Mm. Right. And as a data scientist in these pharmaceutical companies, did you have to learn about the domain expertise?
Yes. So it's been it's been interesting with me because healthcare and pharma are very closely
Mm.
related, but they're
Mhm.
still very separate. When I say healthcare, I'm mainly referring to things like patient care, hospital operations, that side of thing, not the
Right.
clinical trials universe. Now,
Mm-hmm.
what was interesting was healthcare was one of the consulting gigs that I did when I was in grad school. So, I mean, I had a little bit of experience, but healthcare, I feel like it is such a deep and complex field. I mean, like others have said, who knew healthcare could be so complicated, right? So,
Right.
like I went into it with very little domain knowledge of it, and like I
Mm.
went in and I'm like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. It was a lot of just trying new things and then having to go back to the drawing board because you question, well, is this useful to anybody? I mean, that comes with, getting out of academia, I think, in the first place, and then you go
Mm.
into industry, and then sometimes it can hit you really quick what it is you don't know. And the same thing with
Mm.
the pharmaceutical industry. Although once I got to there, I feel like, I don't know if this is a product of the domain being a little bit less complex, or it's just I
Mm.
had gained so much more experience at the time, maybe a combination of both. But when I got into
Mm.
pharma, there's a little bit of a learning curve there as you get the domain
Yeah.
expertise, but
Mm-hmm.
considerably less than the first go around with getting into like
Mm.
hospital operations and patient care delivery.
Mm. Yeah. If you could provide your recommendation to someone who wants to break into data science in the pharmaceutical or healthcare domain, do you have any particular advice for them?
Yeah.
Like how
Um,
they could prepare themselves?
yeah, so specifically with data science, right? Not
Mm.
for I mean going into medical or anything.
Yeah, exactly. Mm.
Can't weigh into that, but
Mm.
um so I did a video on this on my channel about just trying to put a study pathway together for up and coming data
Mm-hmm.
scientists because I
Mm-hmm.
feel like in all domains, what happens with people is they get overwhelmed. There's so many things they feel obligated, like they have to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Like it can be, it's too much. So if you can break it down, like learn this, then learn that, then learn that, I think there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of value there. And what I have it down to now is before anything else, learn statistics. Secondly, learn SQL. And then thirdly, learn either one of R or Python. They're both all over the industry, and I think people get analysis paralysis trying to figure out, oh, should I learn R? Should I learn Python?
Right.
Like to me, it's like, okay, just pick one, pick whichever one
Mm.
feels a little bit more organic, and then take it and run with it.
Mm.
Then I think
Right.
things which are real highlights, which stand out after that. Like after those three, I think a lot of people are enormously employable. But after that point,
Mm.
um, the other one of R or Python, like knowing enough to be dangerous. You don't have to be an expert at it, but knowing enough to be dangerous and to be able to do some work in it and to be able to just read another person's code and maybe start somewhere and really teach
Mm-hmm.
yourself more with maybe a script you developed or with
Right.
somebody else's code.
Mm.
I think that's good. Linear algebra is a good one. User experience techniques is a good one. And then machine learning, obviously, you can't
Mm-hmm.
forget about that. Now, I think now to your point though, I think suppose one has an interest in staying in healthcare specifically. I
Yeah.
think just getting themselves educated. Like I don't have a lot of necessarily good book recommendations or necessarily or anything like
Mm-hmm.
that. But I'd have to say if I could do it all over again,
Mm-hmm.
before I came on in a healthcare capacity, I may have read a little bit about the challenges like healthcare providers face, more
Mm-hmm.
about just the dynamics and the ins and outs of hospital processes.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, that's a very in-depth answer. Very awesome.
That domain
Yeah.
expertise is critical. Like you have to hit all four.
Mm.
To me, data science is um, statistics, programming capabilities, communication, and domain expertise. That domain
Mm-hmm.
expertise can be the toughest one to get unless you already have the
Mm.
job. And to be fair, a lot of times you'll get it in the like you can get your foot in the door maybe, and then
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, you'll learn more once you actually get working. But if
Mm-hmm.
you can make it easier for yourself by just educating yourself. Number one, I think it looks impressive to whomever's on
Mm.
the other side interviewing you, and then number two,
Mm.
gives you just helpful food for thought as you start doing a data analysis, and you have to think about whatever processes generate your data.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, speaking of this domain knowledge, when you're doing your data science projects, do you ever came across a time when you feel like you're lacking some domain expertise and then you have to hit the books or consult with other fellow colleague who are like domain experts?
Yeah, no, it happens all the time. Like like I used to bounce things all the time off somebody
Mm.
who, I mean, with healthcare domain expertise, somebody who
Right.
do it for like 20 years. Like, hey,
Mm.
this like organically with these numbers, like, okay, this person's staying in the ER for 3 hours and this person's staying in for 12 hours. Like, I've personally only been to the emergency room like once in my life, so I don't have a good frame of reference for it.
Right. Mm.
But like little things like that, that makes sense. I mean, more often than not, it involves bouncing things off to clients and stakeholders.
Mhm. Mm. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, so when you get the job in healthcare or in the pharmaceutical company, um, could you describe your interview process or how did you prepare for the interview and then how did you land the job?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I'd say the number one item of prep that I always did.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, there's a lot to it, but number one, actually research the company and know what it is that they do. Like try to get a feel for what kind of problems that they face. Just doing your homework before you actually go into that interview. The other thing is what I think is called the storyboard approach. So no matter what, I mean, the person interviewing you, they want to hear about previous problems that you've solved, right? So
Mm-hmm.
number one, you have to lay the foundation. You have to set up some kind of context for it. You have to describe what it is, what problem you were actually trying to solve, what solution you came up with, and how you got there, and then what the impact was there. And now, the impact part can be a little tough because that can sometimes take years to realize.
Mm-hmm.
If you can at least, I think, speak to um, like what the intended impact is, I think that makes a huge
Mm-hmm.
difference. So
Mm.
that's the number one thing. Um, just doing some basic coding, like getting yourself in that frame of mind where you're thinking about just writing code, even if it's something basic
Mm.
like exploration, summarizing, like it just gets your brain into a really good just state of mind that I think is good because some interviews They'll throw coding questions at you, or they'll be pseudocoding. They'll be literal.
Mm,
Sit down and figure this problem out. Now, for me,
mhm,
it's been all over the place. There have been some interviews. There's like a little question here and there, like a few stats questions here and there.
mhm,
Like a little bit of pseudocoding here and there. There have been some interviews where there's literally zero of that.
wow.
That's actually my current role. I don't remember there being hardly any of that. But on the other extreme, when I interviewed with Google, that was
Mm,
100%, 95% of the interview was those kinds of questions.
wow. Yeah, speaking of coding, when did you first started to learn coding? Was it in undergrad or was it in grad school?
That was in undergrad, and it was with that was with R. And
Hmm.
as you can imagine, I did another class right after that and learned C++, and I'm like, wow, I know
Hmm.
nothing. This is way different. And I'm by no stretch of the imagination
Right.
the best programmer on the planet or a computer scientist. I feel like if I was, then I wouldn't be making YouTube videos as much as I do.
Yeah.
But R just seemed very intuitive to me. That's not to say
Mm,
like C++, it's like it was out of my element or out of my world or anything. No, it made sense. But
hmm.
immediately to me, R seemed very intuitive. And so it was kind of an easy stepping board to start really learning more about it. Now, the way it was set up and with my university too was almost all the classes where there was a coding component, it
Hmm.
involved
Hmm.
R. And so
Okay.
before you know it, and taking a statistical computing class helps substantially. But even
Mm,
for like these little things like, applied regression models, categorical data analysis, survival analysis, just things like that, learning to code all these things up in
hmm.
R, I think gave me a
Mm,
lot of really good intuition about the language. Now Python I didn't pick
hmm.
up until I was actually on the job, but R I
Mm,
had a head start on from undergrad, and it's been nice
hmm.
because in literally every single role that I've done since then, R has been right in the center of it.
Ah, yeah. And how was it when you already have knowledge of R and you're proficient in R? And how is it to pick up another language like Python? Did you find it a lot easier?
It's tough to say. It's tough to say because Python wasn't my first language. So was it
Hmm.
faster because I knew another language? It's
Yeah,
it's tough to say without a control Richard going on there.
exactly. Yeah.
I will say what happened, and this can kind of throw you off a little bit. Was I found
Mm-hmm.
myself thinking, okay, well, I mean, just as an example, I mean, you're installing your packages and then you use your library
Yeah.
in R. So, like, when you're first learning Python, you're thinking, okay,
Mm,
the exact same thing that I do in R, how do I do the exact same
mm,
thing in Python? And because just the structure of them is so completely
yeah.
different, you can get
Mm-hmm.
yourself into a lot of trouble doing that. Like, you have to treat Python
Mm-hmm.
as its own separate entity, just to
Right.
give it the appreciation that it deserves. But if I had to take a stab at it, I think that having learned R first, I think that laid a pretty good foundation for me personally.
Right. Yeah. Like for myself, it's like I started from Python and then I hopped into R, and then yeah. So I guess they're like language agnostic. So its concepts are pretty much the same. And yeah, I think if we know one language, we could easily pick up another language.
I'm curious which one of those two you found more difficult, because I feel like people with programming backgrounds, they find Python a lot easier, and if you have a statistics background, you find R a lot easier. So what was your
Uh-huh.
experience there?
Yeah, so I'm not really a statistics major, and I'm like a non-technical, like coming from biology.
Yeah.
So for myself, I mean, Python looks visually nice, and R looks a bit more cluttered. It took
Yeah.
a while to understand the less than dash to be like an arrow, and while
Yeah.
the cleaner, just the equal sign for Python for assigning variables.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, and then I discovered that for R you could assign it both way, right?
Yep.
From right to left, left to right. Yeah, so that was awesome. And
Yeah.
I really like the tidy verse. That's so good. Yeah.
I absolutely love it. Like it makes your
Mm.
code just a lot more clean, and like from
Right,
your
right.
experience of sharing it with other people, it's
Mm.
a lot easier for them to pick up and immediately see what's going on. Now, it's a good point
Right.
that you made about I mean, Python looking a lot cleaner because it was made
Mm.
for programmers. R was made by statisticians for other statisticians. So the number one thing on their mind was never let's make the syntax look nice and let's make the code look all clean.
Mm. Yeah. What is the predominant language that you're using in your company? Are everyone using the same language, or are they like some using R, some using Python? Do you find it difficult to collaborate on projects if, for example, one is using R, the other is using Python, or are the members using both languages?
Yeah, so in my first company, actually, that was actually a problem because when I came on board, like I noticed, people were all using different languages for different projects.
Mm-hmm.
So and it was very based on like level of comfort. Now, not everything was a strict data science project. There was a lot of business analytics style projects thrown in there. So you had some people, I mean, for some projects, I mean, it was fine to tackle them in purely Excel, a VBA, like that kind of framework. And we had some
Mm-hmm.
people who'd, been around for a while, and that's kind of what they were comfortable with because those things have been around significantly longer than R or Python. Now me and somebody else, we got together and figured, this may be a little unsustainable. There's few enough of us here to where it makes sense. We should all be using the same common language. And we decided just based on, I mean, everybody's background. I mean, some people come from more of a stats background. People tended to have more, to the extent they had prior knowledge with one language or the other. More people knew R versus Python. So getting everybody on the R platform made more sense. And so we integrated that directly into our process for how we do our, data sciences and our service delivery in general. Was,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the bulk of your analysis, unless it was, say a 2 minute or 1 hour thing, which I mean, you needed to get out right then and there. You needed to prototype something, and like a situation like that. I mean, do whatever you want. But for the bulk of analysis, it was R focused. And
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion, I mean, with a small company, there's really no excuse to not be doing something like that. Like it
Mm-hmm.
just makes perfect sense because it makes it just decreases substantially on the barriers to collaboration.
Mm. Awesome. Yeah. And yeah, so let's talk a bit of a less technical question. Um, what text editor do you use, or IDE, for your projects?
I am an art studio person across the board. Like I love it. Like to me, there's no IDE for anything else that compares. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I use Jupyter notebooks a little bit for my Python and my Julia stuff. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like with Python, to me, I always liked Spider more than any of them.
Mm-hmm.
Spider to me has the most RStudio like interface.
Yeah.
But to
Mm-hmm.
me, I love RStudio.
Mm. Yeah. Have you heard of MATLAB? Have you used MATLAB before?
I have not heard of it. I have never used it. Um,
Okay.
yeah,
It looks similar to the RStudio, so it reminded me of MATLAB.
yeah. I know Andrew Ng is a fan.
Ah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like for me personally, I also, I think one of the early languages, I tried C++, Java, right? It didn't work, and I think another language which is quite easy but it's commercial is MATLAB.
Yeah.
And I had a colleague who joined our lab, and he had a knowledge of MATLAB, and then to further our research project, he had to learn Python from scratch. And because of his background in MATLAB, he could pick up Python in like a week or 2 weeks, and then he could, start coding in Python straight off the bat.
Oh, okay.
So
Good deal.
yeah, so MATLAB is pretty similar in structure to learn Python.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think Andrew in particular, like he uses it in his machine learning course, which
Mm,
I mean, to this day I'm terrible because I haven't actually done the course myself. But it's my understanding, um, MATLAB is the foundation for the course, And he set it up
Mm-hmm.
that way because it gives a good kind of fundamental understanding of what the models are actually doing. So I think
Uh-huh.
more of the intuition behind them, and it's
Mm-hmm.
clearer to see that using MATLAB. So
Mm-hmm.
knowing that if you pick MATLAB up, that Python is way easier to pick up. I mean, Python's one of the
Mm-hmm.
easiest things I think for most people to pick up in general. But I mean, hearing that doesn't surprise me.
Right. Yeah, I noticed on your channel you have a couple of videos on Julia.
Yeah, yeah, no, I do. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
and
I've got one which
how is it for data science?
yeah, so I've got like my one video on it is an overview of how it does of how it performs for data science. And
Mm-hmm.
like I first started using it like last year for I mean my current company. And I'm incredibly impressed with it. Like the entire pipeline of things which you could need to do. So
Mm-hmm.
read your data in from some kind of source, whether that's SAS, SQL, CSV, whatever it is. Do your summary statistics, manipulate your data and get it into a nice format. Like it's got this package called data frames, which is analogous to
Mm-hmm.
like pandas. It's
Mm-hmm.
got that. It's pretty nice. The visualization libraries, I don't think are the best in the world, but they get the job done. Certainly, if you're not super picky and
Mm-hmm.
particular about them. It's got a implementation of scikit-learn. So machine learning, you're going to be covered from that alone. The one that still goes over my head sometimes is Flux. That's for that's for gradient descent, like coding machine learning from scratch and deep learning and stuff like that you could do.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, just basically that whole pipeline. One thing which I wish it had was more of a Shiny or Dash sort of
Uh-huh.
package. There's nothing there which even remotely competes with that. So I know it's on the
Mm,
developer's roadmap,
right.
but it's
Yeah,
fast.
speaking of Shiny, yeah, I love Shiny. I mean, Shiny is like one of the reasons that I really like R. And actually it was the reason that I shifted to R was to learn Shiny and use Shiny.
Yeah,
And yeah, so that was a big motivator. Yeah.
I love Shiny. It's very powerful. I like it significantly more than and I'm not an expert in Dash by any stretch of the imagination, but to the extent that I've played with it,
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
nothing compares to Shiny.
Mm, yeah, awesome. And in Python, aside from Dash, I also dabbled with Streamlit, and it's also very intuitive and quite easy to create like data-driven web applications.
Yeah,
So it's also a great package. Yeah,
yeah. I know you have a video on that. I've yet to play with that.
I think we covered a lot of topics. Yeah, so
Yeah.
would you have any final remarks that you would like to share, like your insights for the remainder of 2020, probably for the aspiring data scientists who would like to get started? What would be your tips to get actually break into data science?
Yeah, so my my big tip is always um, learn one thing and do it well. It's so easy to, and I understand. I mean, to some extent, you can't always do that because,
Hmm.
for instance, R is very integrated with stats. You learn stats sometimes by writing code, so like I get things like that. But to the
Hmm.
extent possible, try to learn one thing at a time. So, like I said with my study pathway, learn stats, then focus on SQL, spend a week, get really good at SQL. That way you don't try some projects, and that way you don't really have to think about it again. Then get really good at R. I'm glad I said try projects because that's another thing that I wish when I was in grad school that I did more of. And I mean, with Kaggle and things like that available, it's
Hmm.
super easy to do that now. So just doing some project, even if it could be something on Kaggle, it could be somebody you know has some kind of problem they're interested in, so you come up with some
Hmm.
new and novel analysis, maybe publish that around. And the other big thing would be networking. So just off the top of my head, I think with one exception, every single consulting gig, full-time job, everything I've ever done for employment happened not because I was throwing my resume to 183 different companies, but because I knew somebody. Like with my current role, I had given a talk a few years prior to that at a conference, just an opportunity that I was given inside of my previous organization. And it turns out the guy hiring me at my current company had been there at that presentation. And so they
Awesome.
my name, they're like, oh yeah, I know you. So I mean, maybe I would have gotten the job had that not happened, but that certainly got me up that stack of resumes quite a bit more, if that makes sense. And I mean, right from the get-go, the internships and stuff that I got, the consulting gigs, every single one of them happened because I knew somebody. They had some project or some problem that they needed solved. And because they knew me or they knew somebody who knew me, they just you could very easily make that connection, and then that work landed to me. So I know it's difficult with data scientists a lot because so many of us can be somewhat introverted. To a certain extent, I can be sometimes as well. But putting yourself out there, networking, doing things like posting on LinkedIn, things like that make all the difference in the world from my own experience.
So thank you for all of your insights, Richard. So I guess it's time to conclude the video. And RichardOnData, he has an awesome YouTube channel. And so if you guys haven't yet subscribed to his channel, please go to his channel. The links will be provided in the description of this video and also in the pinned comments. And so, yeah, thank you, Richard, again, for coming on to this channel. And hopefully we could have another discussion in the future.
Thanks, Shannon. I really appreciate it.
All right, bye.
Yep.
Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you in the next one. But in the meantime, please check out these videos.